I could ask you to come forward just for a minute to thank you for one thing, coming out here again. We do view you as a true friend of the regiment. You've been here on several occasions, and you are one of the future leaders of the Army and the way we're going towards the Army of tomorrow. And it's always an honor to have you here. And we have a little something for you. Oh, look, it's a book. And if I can just take a moment as well, we have a couple of other thank yous to do just to get out of the way. One, because I suspect there will be another general who we owe a book to who could see into the future we promised. We had the cavalry dinner a few weeks ago when we had promised Brigadier General Beer a copy of the official history, and I know, sir, that you too will be seeing into the future soon, so please come up and do Finally, although it's not on the program, I just wanted to take a minute and General Leslie, thank you very much for the kind words on behalf of Colonel Milner, but he never really takes enough credit for the work he does. And you can see it, the group that's here today. We see this every day. He touches all aspects of our lives. And he's a master of what we call the reverse slope position. He sits on the other side of the hill. He knows what's going on. He is a very kind and generous man, and he has done so much for this province. And we never really publicly acknowledge that. And he doesn't like it, frankly. It's a very hard man to thank. But on behalf of the officers and NCOs of your regiment, sir, we would like to take a moment to thank you and to, if you could take a small gift from your officers. Please come forward. One of the ones you find around, and we've cleaned it up. In fact, I believe it was used by the Strathconas at some time. There seems to be their crest on it, but it's ours now. More importantly, sir, it's yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Careful, Colonel. Slide out if you're not careful.
The museum, but it's an extraordinary week in the history of the museum. On Thursday morning, we had a wonderful press conference announcing for the media to announce the upcoming opening of the exhibition on Saturday. Really well attended by the media, who responded strongly. Lots of cameras, lots of good print coverage. And that's usually enough for a month or two for us. We do one of those. But no, on Friday, then we had another one where Minister Gary Marr announced the details of the royal visit to the museum. Her Majesty, of course, is coming to Alberta for the centennial, and making a point at stopping at the Provincial Museum. And we had another wonderful day where we had a marvelous woman who's 100 years old, who made a bouquet for the Queen in 1959, is getting a chance to do it again at 100. And we had a baby born in 2005. So we had a woman born in 1905 and one in 2005, and both of those will present flowers to the Queen in a couple of weeks when she's here. But from the museum's perspective, the truly extraordinary news besides her visit is that she's renaming the museum the Royal Alberta Museum. So we're joining, I think, thank you. We're joining a pretty good club with that name. I think of the Royal Ontario Museum, I think of the Royal British Columbia, the Royal Tyrrell. I'd like to think that we're going to be earning that name. It's very significant to us, and it comes at a time when, and here's the next part of the week that's happening. On Tuesday, there's another announcement that I can't tell you the details about, but is going to shape the future of the museum. Two very special announcements. So it's truly an extraordinary week that I've been very pleased to share with you folks. And I forgot today. How could I forget our event today, the actual opening? So I think there's a panel in the exhibition that talks about war, where there's hours and hours or weeks of boredom and then moments of terror. So I like to think of my career sort of that way. There's been 20 years of build-up and now a week of panic. The mission of the museum, the new museum, the new Royal Alberta Museum, is of course to be the place that the story of Alberta is told. And it's a big story. Sometimes we forget that we have tremendous stories to tell, and we need to understand them to know who we are and where we fit in. But in a sense, under my nose, over the past few months, we've been doing exactly that with this exhibition. That I have to let you in on I guess I thought of this initially, and I apologize. It's just another historical military exhibition that we might do. And of course, it's absolutely not that, is it? It's what this is about is a very modern, a very current story, and it's about people who live their lives amongst us. And what I've seen here is kind of opening of that door to that world. And it's not quite like Two Solitudes and McLennan's Story of Canada, but in the sense that the military world is different. You all know that. Many of you are in it. But you've given my wife and I a glimpse into your family over the last little while, and it's been truly delightful for us. And I'm hoping that with this exhibition, that Albertans who don't ever think about the military take the time to get a glimpse, to see that door open into what life is like, what the soldiers who are part of the South Alberta Light Horse do on a daily basis. And the great thing is they'll be there. There'll be soldiers there, and that's thank you to Colonel Putt for making sure that there's going to be people there, because one can read text, look at pictures, but to interact with the human beings that are there will for them, I think, create a greater understanding. So I'm looking for a lot to come out of this exhibition, and I look to it as a model for the kind of work that we'll be doing in your museum, the new Royal Alberta Museum, in the future. So thank you very much for letting us be part of this. And Stan, we couldn't let you get away without a little something from the museum. It's not a book. It's a very flat book, but it's just something for the trophy wall, just so you don't forget us when you go back.
Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this museum has been spectacular in their assistance, in their consideration of history, and their help to the regiment. They just grabbed hold of it, and they just somehow felt that this was something about Alberta and something about history that they had to help us preserve. You've done a wonderful job.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bruton.
No remarks about a living legend of Canadian football. The introduction was a little weak, Brian. Another thing before I start is I know how old I'm getting because I look at those two generals and man, oh man, they look like high school kids. It still makes me nervous coming up here and sitting close to McTaggart's because they have had a huge Oriental art collection. Cecile is still trying to buy me from me. She thinks I'm a Buddha. And one last thing before I start is, Mary asked me, she said, are all those guys at the camps? Honorable Rob Brenner, Major General Leslie, Brigadier General Bear, Lieutenant Colonel Watson, Lieutenant Colonel Putt, is he called? Dr. McGilvery, ladies and gentlemen, a very appropriate date today, the eve of VE Day, and of course this year we celebrate the centennial of our beloved province. A province with a relatively short but remarkable history. And perhaps the most glorious part of that history revolves around the heroism of Alberta's veterans, many of whom are with us today. Veterans and members of a military unit that has served this province from the very beginning. The South Alberta Light Horse Regiment celebrates its centennial this year, and it is thanks to their service in defending this nation that we have the luxury of celebrating Alberta's centennial too. Through 4 terrible wars, whether braving enemy fire on horseback or charging enemy lines in modern armor, the soldiers of the South Alberta Light Horse Regiment gallantly served their province and their nation, risking their lives to defend us from tyranny. This regiment has never failed us, and Alberta's prosperity and freedom are our reward for their valor and their sacrifices. So as we celebrate Alberta's centennial, we must also celebrate Alberta's veterans. To do so will need to remind Albertans not only of the bravery of those who served and served us, it will remind us that veterans are all around us and that they remain active members of our community, and precious members at that. We can never repay our veterans, but we can do honor to their service by remembering their sacrifices, by treating all members of the armed forces with respect, and by doing our best to live up to the values that they defended. So congratulations to the South Alberta Light Horse Regiment for 100 years of service above and beyond the call of duty. You have done us proud for a century, and no one can doubt that your courage was instrumental in shaping the Alberta we all know and love today. Thank you very much.
Captain Steele, the Operations Officer for the South Alberta Light Horse, and welcome to the Royal Alberta Museum's presentation of the centennial display for the South Alberta Light Horse. This is the entrance for the exhibit, and on our right here you have the 1905 uniform and the current dress uniform for the Canadian Forces. Behind me here you see a list of all the cap badges that the unit perpetuates. We have an artillery line, an infantry line, and our corps, of course, is from the cavalry. It's a complex set of amalgamations, but when you take it into context, you'll see that we are Canada's true Pan-Alberta regiment. Corporal Siviak will take you through the early days before the official formation of the regiment.
Well, in April of 1885, the government, who was not confident that they could adequately protect southeastern Alberta, authorized the raising of the Rocky Mountain Rangers. As you can see from this picture, they were irregular in every sense of the word. Note the hand-rolled smoke and the revolver placed into the belt. They were charged with the task of patrolling southeastern Alberta, a task which they executed very, very well. At the end of the rebellion, these soldiers were paid off either in $80 in cash or in 320 acres of land. It's interesting that the majority of them took that land grant and settled in what is now Pincer Creek.
1905 to 1914, which was the beginning of the First World War, saw the actual roots of the South Alberta Light Horse. You'll see that this part of the exhibit demonstrates a lot of the materials that the regiment would wear. We have the distinctive Stetson hat, the fine cross belt, the 1905 serge tunic with the gold facings. You'll also notice that we've got the trooper here in a set of pants with a double gold stripe designating light cavalry versus the single stripe which would designate heavy cavalry, such as the RCMP would wear. The various equipment that we've got here, we've got the trooper pattern sword, the boot for the Enfield rifle, a tent peg, and various other saddlery accoutrements for his horse, as we are a cavalry regiment. During 1905 to 1914, a lot of the daily duties of the regiment were training in cavalry drills and mounted combat. It was at 1914 that, with the introduction of World War I, that everything changed and a significant change in the regiment occurred. In 1905, our first commanding officer was Lieutenant Colonel James Walker. He was an ex-RCMP officer who came forward to take command of the regiment. Colonel Walker's accomplishments were significant. He finally progressed from the 15th Light Horse to command the entire 4 cavalry units in Alberta, and in his passing in 1936, he was appointed the honorary colonel for the regiment during that time. Colonel Walker's history was in the foundation of the cavalry in Alberta, and was a significant historical figure within the cavalry history of the province. During World War I, the trench system was introduced on the battlefield, and the 19th Alberta Dragoons and the 31st Battalion met a set of horrors that nobody could have foresaw. Of the 4,500 soldiers that served in the 31st Battalion, over 800 of them would become full casualties, and that's a tremendous casualty rate. This part of the exhibit reproduces a section of the trench and gives an interactive display in regards to what it would be like in the trenches and some of the equipment that they would have used. The 19th Alberta Dragoons did continue in the mounted role, while the 31st Battalion went straight into the trenches as dismounted infantry. As World War I came to a conclusion, the true horror of the sacrifice that the 31st Battalion made came to light. By 1919, the honor roll for the dead of the battalion grew to a staggering 930 people. By 1919, 708 of those were killed, 195 died of their wounds, and 6 died from wounds while prisoners of war, while 25 died of disease and other accidental deaths. So as I mentioned, that's a casualty rate over 20% of everybody who served in the regiment or the battalion. That's a staggering number. The period between World War I and World War II, also known as the lean years, Corporal Angle will take you through a description of the exhibit that highlights that period.
It was a time when all the World War I veterans were coming home under the new name of 31st Battalion, Canadian Expeditionary Force, and they had lost 938 of their members for a 1,000-man battalion that went overseas. There were thousands of men that had contributed everything they had and sacrificed a great deal in order to come back. And when they came back, they found a world that was in recession, with a lot of military money that had no longer been spent. The money wasn't there. It was the whole recession in all of Canada that they were coming home to. When they came back, a lot of them required a lot of rehabilitation from the gas attacks, from the psychological effects that the war had on them. So when they were in the hospital, they'd be seeing things like the trench art with the articulate details that they could put into it with all their time in and trying to get reacquainted back with society. During the war, they saw a lot of positive morale and positive public support from things like the banner there, where everybody saw them as heroes. When they came back, there was rampant non-military spending, that there was no money being put in, the recession once again.
This part of the exhibit references the 19th Alberta Dragoons, which in 2005 the South Alberta Light Horse will incorporate into our lineage. It's a tremendous accomplishment for us and quite a feather in our cap, as the history of the Dragoons is in part of Edmonton, and Alberta's history is integral, and we're very proud to have them now part of the South Alberta Light Horse's history. This part of the exhibit behind me highlights the fact that the Dragoons gave a mounted escort for the royal visit in 1939, and gives a fine explanation of the World War I exploits, including the cavalry charge near the end of the war, I believe, which is the last cavalry charge of the war. So South Alberta Light Horse is a fine addition to the family, with the inclusion of the 19th Alberta Dragoons as part of our centenary. As Canada declared war on September 10th, 1939, the South Alberta Regiment which is one of the perpetuating units for the South Alberta Light Horse, entered the war and became the Second World War's perpetuating unit for the regiment. The SAR was a tank regiment, or evolved into a tank regiment, and served on the Sherman tank, which was the standard main battle tank for the Canadian Forces during the Second World War. The South Alberta Regiment had an outstanding Second World War history. In fact, one of the finest of any regiment in the Canadian Army. The highlight of which, of course, is Major David Currie winning the Victoria Cross in France. The South Alberta Regiment was nicknamed the Keen-Eyed Prairie Men. They had distinguished themselves such that Major General Worthington had selected them as the eyes and ears for the Armored Corps' march across Northwest Europe. General Worthington, of course, was the founder of the Armored Corps and had a special place in his heart for the South Alberta Light Horse. In fact, presented the guidon to the South Alberta Light Horse in 1967 due to his affection for the South Alberta Regiment. On July 25th, 1944, the South Alberta Regiment landed in France and began the march through Northwest Europe. Under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Witherspoon, they were to present themselves as one of the finest regiments in the Canadian Army. Lieutenant Colonel Witherspoon's command half-track was then smuggled back to Canada, and I won't go into details on how they managed that. However, the South Alberta Light Horse was able to actually find and restore that half-track, and it is presented here as part of the hallmark presentation items for the museum. This is the actual command half-track that was used in Europe by the South Alberta Regiment. Was fully restored in 2004 and 2005 by a group of South Alberta Light Horse soldiers at a significant cost. It is a full runner, and it will be used in the Freedom of the City Parade later in Medicine Hat in October of this year as a final event at part of our centennial celebrations. The half-track is fully restored, as I said, and repainted in its original war colors. The lads and lasses did a great job of researching every intricate detail of it, including restoration of all the radio sets and all of the command structure in the back of the half-track. So it is one of the very few authentic military vehicles from the Second World War that actually served in Europe and is actually functional. This is the regimental guidon. Historically, it was carried into battle heavily guarded, as the guidon was the fighting essence of the regiment, and should it be captured, the regiment was either dishonored or disbanded. Currently, it is no longer carried into battle. In fact, is the centerpiece of our ceremonial historic practices. It is still guarded very, very cherishedly by 2 senior NCOs and 1 guidon standard bearer.